The sun shone brightly over the sprawling campus of Winslow Academy, a place where wealth glittered like the gold on the school's crest. The students, dressed in designer clothes, roamed the halls with an air of superiority. Laughter echoed, but it felt empty, a facade that masked the competition and envy simmering beneath the surface. They were the elite, and in this world, status defined worth. In the art classroom, Thaddeus Thornton stood tall, his posture radiating confidence that bordered on arrogance. He leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning the room before landing on Lila Monroe. She sat quietly at her desk, her hands stained with paint, a stark contrast to the polished lives of her classmates. Thaddeus smirked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Look at you, Lila. Are you trying to create a masterpiece or just make a mess?" Lila felt the heat rise in her cheeks. She looked down at her canvas, the vibrant colors a reflection of her passion, but in that moment, all her confidence seemed to drain away. How could she explain that art was her escape, her way of expressing feelings that words could never capture? She took a deep breath, trying to mask the pain of his words. Instead of responding, she focused on her brush strokes, desperate to blend into the background. "Why bother? You know you'll never be one of us," Thaddeus continued, his laughter ringing out, drawing the attention of others. The room buzzed with whispers, and Lila felt the weight of their gazes. She wished she could disappear, to erase the embarrassment that clung to her like a shadow. As the class continued, Lila's heart raced. She wanted to shout, to tell Thaddeus that she was more than her background, more than the clothes she wore. But instead, she stayed silent, her mind racing with thoughts of self-doubt. Would they ever see her for who she truly was? Did anyone care to look beyond the surface? The atmosphere shifted as the door creaked open, and in walked Mr. Langston, the new art teacher. His presence was calming, and he surveyed the room with a perceptive gaze. He could sense the tension, the underlying currents of toxicity. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to create a space where everyone feels valued and respected." Lila looked up, a flicker of hope igniting within her. Could things change? Mr. Langston continued, "Art is not just about technique, it's about connection and expression. I want each of you to find your voice." Thaddeus rolled his eyes, dismissing the teacher's words. "Yeah, right. Like that's going to happen with this bunch," he muttered, his tone laced with sarcasm. Lila caught his gaze for a brief moment, and her heart raced again. Did he even realize the impact of his words? Mr. Langston noticed the exchange, his brow furrowing slightly. "We'll start with a project that encourages collaboration," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the room. "You will pair up with someone you wouldn't normally work with. I believe it's essential to step out of your comfort zone." The room fell silent, the students exchanging glances, unsure of what this meant. Lila's heart pounded in her chest as she wondered who her partner would be. Thaddeus's face darkened, and he leaned back in his chair, arms crossed defiantly. "No way I'm working with her," he declared, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Lila's stomach twisted in knots. She had hoped for an opportunity to prove herself, but the thought of being paired with Thaddeus filled her with dread. Could she endure another round of humiliation? "Life is full of surprises," Mr. Langston replied calmly, his eyes locking onto Thaddeus. "You might find it enlightening." The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but Lila remained frozen in her seat. As students filed out, whispers filled the air, and she felt the familiar sting of judgment. She glanced at Thaddeus one last time, his expression a mix of frustration and disdain. In that moment, Lila vowed to find her strength, to stand tall, despite the shadows of privilege looming over her. As the room emptied, Mr. Langston lingered, a determined look on his face. He could sense the struggle, the need for change, and he was ready to fight for it. Mr. Langston stood at the front of the art classroom, a bright smile lighting up his face. The walls, adorned with colorful paintings and sketches, seemed to breathe life into the otherwise tense atmosphere. His enthusiasm was palpable, as he addressed the students, who were more interested in their phones than in his words. "Good morning, everyone. Today, I have an exciting announcement," he said, his voice warm and inviting. The students barely looked up, their eyes glued to screens. "We will be starting a collaborative project that pairs you with a partner. This is your chance to create something amazing together." Thaddeus Thornton, leaning back in his chair with an air of superiority, rolled his eyes. "Great, just what I need, a project with someone who doesn't even belong here," he muttered, loud enough for his friends to hear. Lila, sitting a few rows away, felt her stomach twist at his words. She had hoped for a fresh start in Mr. Langston's class, but now she braced herself for the worst. Why did they always have to make her feel so small? Mr. Langston continued, oblivious to the tension. "I'll be pairing you randomly. This is all about teamwork and learning from one another." He paused for effect, his eyes scanning the room. "Lila, you will be working with Thaddeus." A gasp rippled through the classroom. Thaddeus shot up in his seat, his face a blend of disbelief and irritation. "No way, I refuse to work with her," he exclaimed, pointing at Lila as if she were a disease. "Thaddeus," Mr. Langston replied firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This project is mandatory, and I expect you both to make the best of it. You'll learn a lot from each other." Lila felt her heart race. She wanted to disappear, but knew that wasn't an option. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had been humiliated before, but this time, she would not let Thaddeus's arrogance break her. "Whatever you say, Mr. Langston," Thaddeus replied, crossing his arms defiantly, "but I'm not going to waste my time on this." "Just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's a waste," Lila said quietly, surprising even herself. The words slipped out before she could think them through. She could feel the eyes of her classmates on her, some smirking, others curious. Thaddeus turned to her, his expression a mix of annoyance and surprise. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I said, just because you don't like it doesn't mean it's a waste," Lila repeated, her voice steadier this time. "Maybe if you tried, you might actually learn something." The room fell silent, tension hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Thaddeus blinked, caught off guard by her unexpected confidence. For a moment, something shifted in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by a sneer. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Lila. I'm not interested in your little art projects," he shot back, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his tone. Lila met his gaze, refusing to back down. "Then why don't you just work on your own? I can do this by myself if I have to." "Good luck with that," Thaddeus scoffed, but deep down, he felt the pressure of her challenge. He was used to getting his way, and Lila was not playing the part he expected. As the class ended, Lila gathered her supplies, her heart racing with a mix of fear and determination. She knew this project could either break her or set her on a path to prove herself. She would not let Thaddeus's disdain define her. "See you later, partner," Thaddeus called sarcastically as he walked out of the classroom. Lila clenched her fists, feeling a surge of resolve. This was just the beginning, and she would not let him win. With every step, Lila felt the weight of her decision. She would show Thaddeus that there was more to her than her background. She would prove that her voice mattered, even in a world where privilege often drowned out the rest. The project was her chance, and she was ready to take it. The atmosphere at the elite school in Los Angeles shifted dramatically after the viral photo. Thaddeus Thornton, once the king of the social scene, now found himself the subject of whispers and judgment. Students he had once ruled over looked at him differently, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and scorn. The laughter that had once followed him now echoed like a haunting reminder of his actions. As he walked through the halls, Thaddeus felt the weight of every gaze. "Did you see that photo?" one student whispered to another, not bothering to lower their voices. Thaddeus clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. He had always been the untouchable one, the leader in a world defined by wealth and status. Now, he felt exposed and vulnerable. In the art room, Lila had become the unexpected center of attention. Students who had once ignored her now approached her with kindness. "I can't believe how brave you were," one girl said, a warm smile on her face. Lila felt a rush of warmth spread through her. For the first time, she felt seen and valued for something other than her social status. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Lila's confidence grew as she immersed herself in her art. The project with Thaddeus loomed over her, but it no longer filled her with dread. Instead, it became a challenge she was determined to tackle. "I won't let him bring me down," she told herself, her gaze fixed on the canvas before her. She began to express her feelings through her artwork, each stroke of the brush a step toward healing. Meanwhile, in the courtyard, Thaddeus sat alone, staring at the ground. He could hear the laughter of other students, but it felt distant, like the sound of a party he was no longer invited to. The reality of his actions hit him hard. He had hurt Lila, and now he was the one facing the consequences. For the first time, he began to reflect on his behavior. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself, a sense of regret washing over him. As the days passed, Thaddeus noticed a change in how people treated him. Former friends avoided him, their eyes averted. He overheard snippets of conversation about his fall from grace. "He's not the same anymore," one boy said, his tone full of disdain. Thaddeus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "I've lost everything," he thought, grappling with the reality of his new existence. One afternoon, as he walked into the art class, he caught a glimpse of Lila. She was surrounded by other students, laughing and sharing ideas. A pang of jealousy coursed through him, but he quickly brushed it aside. He knew he had to face her. He had to confront the mess he had made. Taking a deep breath, he approached her. "Lila, can we talk?" he asked, his voice faltering slightly. She turned to him, her expression cautious. "What do you want, Thaddeus?" she replied, her tone defensive but curious. He could see the remnants of pain in her eyes, and it struck him harder than he expected. I want to say I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. "What I did was wrong. I didn't think about how it would affect you. I was just trying to fit in, and I hurt you in the process." The sincerity in his voice surprised even him. Lila studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "You did hurt me, Thaddeus, but you also hurt yourself," she said, her voice steady. "You've lost a lot by treating people this way." "I know," he admitted, a wave of shame washing over him. "I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to change." Lila nodded, seeing a flicker of genuine remorse in his eyes. "It's going to take time. You can't expect everyone to forgive you right away." "I understand," he replied, relief flooding through him at her willingness to listen. "I just want to start over. Can we try to work together on the project? I promise I'll do better." A small smile crept onto Lila's face, and for the first time, Thaddeus felt a glimmer of hope. "Okay, let's give it a shot," she said. "But it won't be easy." As they stood together, the tension between them began to dissolve. In that moment, both Lila and Thaddeus sensed the potential for change, not just within themselves, but in the way they viewed each other. The journey ahead would be challenging, but perhaps it was one worth taking. Thaddeus sat alone in the courtyard, the weight of his recent choices pressing down on him. The laughter of his classmates echoed around him, but it felt distant, like a fading memory. He stared at the ground, deep in thought. "What have I done?" he whispered to himself, recalling the moment when his careless actions turned Lila into a target. The realization struck him. His friendships, based on fear and intimidation, left him feeling empty. He glanced over at Lila, who was working on her art project in the corner of the courtyard. She seemed to glow with a new confidence, her brush dancing across the canvas with passion. Thaddeus remembered a time when he would have mocked her, but now he felt a strange sense of admiration. Lila was no longer the girl he could easily belittle. She was thriving, and it made him question his own choices. "Hey, Lila," Thaddeus called out, his voice uncertain. She looked up, startled. "Can we talk?" Lila hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you want, Thaddeus?" she replied, her tone cautious. I want to apologize," he said, feeling the words slip out before he could stop them. "I've been a jerk. The way I treated you was wrong." Lila studied him, searching for any hint of insincerity. "Is this a joke? You've mocked me for so long. Why should I believe you now?" Thaddeus swallowed hard, his heart racing. "Because I'm tired of being that person. I've realized that I don't want to be friends with people who only respect me out of fear. I want to change." Her expression softened slightly, but skepticism lingered. "Change doesn't happen overnight, you know." "I know," he replied, his voice steady. "But I want to try. I want to make things right, starting with you." Lila looked away for a moment, contemplating his words. "Okay," she finally said, her voice firm. "But you have to mean it. You need to own up to what you've done." "I will," Thaddeus promised, feeling a flicker of hope. "I'm ready to face it. I want to make amends." As they talked, Lila began to share her excitement about the art project. "I've been working on something that reflects my journey. It's not just about me anymore. It's about everyone who has felt small or overlooked." Thaddeus nodded, inspired by her passion. "I'd like to see it. Maybe we can combine our ideas," he suggested, surprising even himself with the offer. "Really? You want to collaborate?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Yeah," he said, a smile breaking through his serious facade. "I think it could be interesting." Lila smiled back, a cautious but genuine expression. "Okay, let's do it. But remember, I'm holding you to that promise." As they began to work together, Thaddeus felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known before. He tried to push past the arrogance that had defined him for so long. "I've never really understood art like you do," he admitted. "It always seemed pointless." "It's not pointless," Lila replied, her voice passionate. "Art is a way to express who we are, to tell our stories. It can change how people see the world." Thaddeus listened intently, feeling a shift within himself. "Maybe I've been so focused on fitting in that I forgot to be myself." Their conversation deepened, forging a connection neither expected. Lila challenged him to reflect on his past actions and the impact they had on others. "You need to acknowledge the hurt you caused, Thaddeus," she said, her voice steady. "It's the first step to becoming better." "I know," he said, looking down again, shame washing over him. "I didn't realize how much I hurt you until now." For the first time, Thaddeus felt a flicker of self-awareness. It was uncomfortable, but necessary. He realized he had a choice, to continue on the path of arrogance or to seek redemption. As the day came to a close, he looked at Lila, who was now focused on her canvas, her brush strokes filled with emotion. He felt a surge of determination. "I'm going to change," he whispered to himself, knowing it would not be easy, but it was a start. The journey ahead seemed daunting, but for the first time, he felt hopeful. Thaddeus stood in front of the mirror, his heart racing. The reflection staring back at him was a mix of uncertainty and hope. He had spent days thinking about what had happened, about how he had treated Lila. The weight of his past actions pressed heavily on his chest. With a deep breath, he whispered to himself, "I have to try." The next day in art class, Thaddeus approached Lila. She was sitting at her usual spot, sketching quietly. The classroom buzzed with the chatter of students, but in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the room. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, some of them curious, others snickering. "Lila," he said, his voice almost a whisper. She looked up, surprise and caution in her eyes. "Can we talk?" "About what?" Lila replied, crossing her arms. She was clearly not ready to let her guard down. Thaddeus took a step closer, his palms sweaty and his throat dry. I want to apologize. I was a jerk. I made fun of you, and I'm sorry. Lila raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over her face. You expect me to believe that just like that, after everything? I know it sounds hollow, Thaddeus said, frustration creeping into his voice. But I really mean it. I've been thinking about how I treated you. It was wrong. Lila studied him, her expression softening slightly. You think saying sorry makes it all better? You still hurt me, Thaddeus. I know, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't change the past, but I want to try to be better. Can we start over, just for the project? She hesitated, the internal conflict evident on her face. Finally, she sighed. Fine, but this doesn't mean I trust you yet. Thaddeus felt a weight lift. That's fair. I'll work hard on this project. I promise. As the weeks passed, their project became a symbol of their changing relationship. They spent hours together, brainstorming ideas and working side by side. Thaddeus found himself drawn to Lila's passion for art. She had a way of seeing the world that was different from his own, and it inspired him. One afternoon, as they worked on their mural, Thaddeus looked over at Lila. You know, I never realized how talented you are. Your ideas are amazing. Lila paused and looked at him, a hint of surprise in her eyes. Thanks, I guess. I've always loved art, but it's hard to feel good about it when you're surrounded by people who don't see you. Thaddeus nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I get that now. I used to think being popular meant being the best, but I see that it's so much more than that. Their collaboration continued to grow. The mural took shape, a vibrant mix of colors and emotions that reflected both of their backgrounds. Lila brought warmth and depth, while Thaddeus added bold strokes and sharp lines. It was a blend of their worlds, and neither of them could have imagined how beautiful it would become. However, not everyone was pleased with Thaddeus's change. His former friends began to notice the distance between them. One day, as he walked down the hallway, a group of them called out to him. Hey, Thaddeus, what's up with you? Hanging out with the loser now? One of them laughed, his voice dripping with mockery. Thaddeus felt a surge of anger, but also an unfamiliar sense of resolve. He turned to face them. Lila is not a loser. She's a great artist, and I'm proud to work with her. The laughter died down, replaced by surprised silence. Thaddeus could see the confusion on their faces. Whatever, man. You're making a mistake, another friend said, shaking his head as he walked away. As Thaddeus walked back to Lila, his heart raced. He felt the sting of their words, but also a strange satisfaction. He was choosing his path, and it felt right. Hey, everything okay? Lila asked, noticing his expression. Yeah, just dealing with some old friends, Thaddeus replied, a small smile breaking through. But I'm okay. I'm ready to embrace this new me. Lila smiled back, a flicker of hope in her eyes. Good, because I think we can really create something amazing together. And with that, they both turned back to their mural, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, united in their journey toward redemption. The day of the school art exhibition had finally arrived. The bright lights of the gallery shone down on the walls, illuminating the many pieces created by the talented students of the elite school. Lila stood nervously beside her artwork, her heart racing as she watched the crowd move from one display to another. Her piece was a reflection of her journey, filled with colors that spoke of pain, hope, and newfound strength. As she adjusted the frame, she noticed Thaddeus across the room. He was deep in conversation with a small group of his former friends, their laughter ringing out like a stark contrast to the emotions swirling within her. She could see the pride in his eyes as he gestured toward his own piece, a striking representation of growth and change. It was clear that he had poured himself into his work, just as she had. Hey, Lila, a voice called out, breaking her thoughts. It was Mia, one of her classmates. Your piece is amazing. I love how you use those colors. Thanks, Mia, Lila replied, a shy smile crossing her face. I really wanted to show what I've been through. Look, Thaddeus is showing off his work too, Mia pointed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Lila felt a mix of emotions. Part of her was proud of Thaddeus for stepping out of his old shadow, but another part was still cautious. Would he remember the hurt he had caused her? As if sensing her thoughts, Thaddeus turned and caught her gaze. He nodded, a silent acknowledgement that felt like a bridge being built between them. Moments later, Mr. Langston, the art teacher, stepped onto the small stage at the front of the gallery. Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we celebrate the creativity and resilience of our students. Each piece tells a story, and I encourage you to listen to those stories. Lila's heart swelled with pride as he spoke. This was not just an exhibition, it was a testament to their journeys, both painful and beautiful. And now, Mr. Langston continued, I would like to invite Lila and Thaddeus to share their experiences behind their pieces. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She had not expected this. Thaddeus looked equally surprised, but stepped forward, motioning for Lila to join him. For a moment, they stood side by side, uncertainty hanging in the air. Thaddeus cleared his throat. I'll go first, he said, a hint of nervousness creeping into his voice. My piece is about change. I used to think being popular meant everything, but I learned that real strength comes from being vulnerable and honest. He glanced at Lila, a look of sincerity in his eyes. I hurt people, and I'm sorry for that. The crowd was quiet, absorbing his words. Lila felt a warmth in her chest. Thaddeus was finally showing a side of himself that she had longed to see. Now it was her turn. My piece reflects my journey, she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. It shows the struggle of feeling invisible and the strength found in vulnerability. I learned that everyone has a story, and we can all grow from our experiences. As she spoke, Lila noticed the smiles on the faces of her classmates. Students who had once been indifferent or even hostile were now listening, engaged. The atmosphere that had once felt so toxic was shifting, replaced by a sense of unity. When they finished, the applause erupted around them. Lila felt tears prick at her eyes. She had never imagined receiving such acceptance, especially from those who once turned away from her. Thaddeus turned to her, a smile breaking across his face. We did it, Lila. We really did it. Yeah, we did, Lila replied, her voice filled with emotion. I'm proud of us. In that moment, they were not just Thaddeus and Lila, the popular boy and the outcast. They were two individuals who had faced their fears, learned from their pasts, and discovered the power of empathy. As the night continued, they found themselves surrounded by their classmates, talking and laughing, the walls of rivalry crumbling around them. Lila and Thaddeus stood together, looking toward the future, knowing that their journey was just beginning and that true strength lay in their ability to embrace change together. Share this story if you believe that resilience and empathy can overcome even the toughest challenges. Leave a comment about a time when you found strength in vulnerability, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one